Welcome to the Shema Podcast, the podcast for the perplexed, where Torah insights intertwined through personal stories as well as interviews with leading Torah scholars demonstrate the empowering qualities of Torah and mitzvot. For more great Torah learning through Torch, the Torah Outreach Center of Houston, go to torchweb.org. Now to the show.
Welcome back, my friends, to another episode of the Shema Podcast. I want to discuss something with you today that I think will bring a tremendous amount of clarity to where we are right now as the Jewish people. In light of what's happening in the world, with Israel being attacked by Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran, I think it's important to understand where we are right now is to understand the exiles we have been in and the meaning each of them have had, and to understand truly the exile that we are in right now. So I'm going to begin by talking about all the descendants of Abraham and how they play a part in this saga the Jewish people find themselves in today. I know this may be elementary for some of you, but for some this may be necessary for those who are not familiar with all the descendants of Abraham. Abraham's first child was with Hagar, an Egyptian princess. And since Sarah could not conceive children, she allowed Abraham to conceive with Hagar in order to give him children. And he had Ishmael. And Ishmael was sent out, and he became the father of the Muslim population. Now, many in the Muslim population are very holy people. They pray to one God. They believe in the God as defined by our Torah. That's why Maimonides says that we're allowed to pray in a mosque, but we can't pray in a church where they're praying to a figure of a man. However, as we know, many have become very corrupted in their belief system, in the way they think they're supposed to serve their Creator. However, when you look at the exiles, and I'll get into those in more depth, we are not in the exile of Ishmael. So let's go down a little further in the family tree. After Abraham has a son with Hagar, and God says that he is going to provide a progeny through Sarah, and he has Isaac. And Isaac has two sons. They're twins. One is Jacob, and one is Esau. And Esau is where we really need to focus, because that is where our current exile resides, and I'll explain. You have to first understand Esau. Esau learned Torah with Isaac and from his grandfather Abraham. He knew exactly right from wrong, permitted and prohibited. He knew these things. But Esau had a lack of belief in himself. He had a low self-esteem problem. And therefore, even though he knew what was right and wrong, he did not believe that he could actually change his behavior as a result. This is very, very key. This is why in the cave where Adam and Chaya and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob are buried, only Esau's head was buried in the cave. The whole story behind that. But the idea is that the only thing that was holy was what was above the neck. He understood God. He understood what was right and wrong. But his body was never transformed because of what he knew. Now, Esau was also called Edom, which means red. Where did he get that term? It was when he gave up his birthright to Jacob. And that whole transaction was, if you recall the story, is that Jacob is making lentil soup. And Esau comes in after being in the fields, after stealing, and after raping and doing all these horrible things. And he points to stew and basically says, I want some of that red stuff to eat. And Jacob negotiates that he'll give him some red stuff in order for his birthright. And the deeper meaning of all this is that Esau did not care about his spiritual inheritance. All he cared about was this world and satisfying all his lustful pleasures in this world. And that is where he got that name. And that is the description of the fourth exile. But let's now back up a little more and let's discuss exile. Because exile is something that was prophesied multiple times throughout the Torah. We were told we were going to be scattered to all four corners of the planet, and that in the end, God would take us back. Now, what does exile do? Well, we are supposed to be a light to the nations. And how would we have been a light to the nations if we stayed in Israel? By pushing us out into the world, it caused us to influence it, and we have influenced it in a very positive way. However, sadly, in many ways, the outside world has influenced many of us. And that is why we have suffered as we have over the generations. The other thing that exile does is it allows us, for one, to allow God to fulfill a promise he made to many people who, during the giving of the Torah to the Jewish people, everyone was offered it, and many people in these other nations wanted the Torah as well. So God promises them that in our generation, that he would allow them through reincarnation to come back and go through a conversion process and make the choice to join the Jewish people, which is what is happening in droves right now. The other thing that's happening, fulfilling a prophecy, is the number of Baal Teshuvah, people that were brought up secular that are now returning to Torah and mitzvos. This was a prophecy that would occur in our lifetime, and it is. It's tremendous, the number of people who were brought up secular, whose parents were secular, whose parents wanted nothing to do with Torah Judaism, and they, on their own volition, are returning. And so what exile does is it allows us to capture all these Jews returning back to who they are at following the Torah, and allowing us to bring in all the converts that were destined to join the Jewish people. And of course, at a certain point in our future, we will get the message when Mashiach comes, and God will tell the Mashiach to tell us it's time for everyone to come home. But in the meantime, our current post out throughout all the world is serving a vital purpose. But let's now talk about each of these exiles. And we'll start with the first three. We're there to attack a different aspect of our being. Because who are we in aggregate? We are a body, we are emotions, and we are an intellect/soul. The soul is what gives us our consciousness. And so these exiles started from the bottom, working their way up. So let's talk about each of these exiles and how they each attacked each of these areas of our identity. So the first exile was the Babylonian exile. And what they attacked was our body. They just wanted to destroy us, to kill us. Now, they were not interested in areas concerning the intellect. Matter of fact, they took the elite of the Jewish people, the prophets and the Torah scholars, and they sent them to Babylon. And they were able to live there. The rest of the Jewish population they killed. That is Babylon, which had the philosophy that might is right. Whoever is stronger should use their strength to overpower others and make them submissive to them. And then we go into the next exile, which is the Persian exile. And this is where we find the story of Purim. And what did they attack? They attacked that next level, the emotional aspect of ourselves. Their philosophy was to pursue lust. But we won that through the Purim story. We did our teshuvah, we prayed, and we became victorious. And Haman was killed. And then the third exile was with Greece. And this was much different, much more subtle in its attack, because Greece was the first country we ever encountered as a Jewish people. Keeping in mind that up to this point in time, the Jewish people had 100% literacy. These people were the most educated people in all areas of life. Everything is in Torah, not just the laws and halakha, but the sciences, math, anything to do with God's creation was in there. And after so many thousands of years, we finally meet the Greeks, and they're an educated, thinking people. We liked them at first, and they did not want to kill us. They were fine with us existing alongside with them. However, they wanted us to forego our spiritual connection and our spiritual pursuits. And the Hanukkah story is a celebration how we stood firm and we said no. And through standing firm, God stepped in and protected us. We had a very small ragtag army of soldiers, and we took on the most dominant military in world history up to that point, and we're victorious. The message being is that if we stay true to Torah, our purpose in this world, then God will always protect us. And so we won and we were freed from that exile. And I want to discuss these a little more. There's a verse in the Torah called the covenant of the parts. It was always very strange to me. Every time I read it, I was like, I knew there was something really deep here, but it wasn't until I came across a text I was reading last Shabbos called Days Are Coming by Rabbi Israel Tober that I understood it. He explained it. He explained through the teachings of the Maharal, who lived during the late 16th century and early 17th century. And he explained it like this. Let me first explain what's taking place in the Torah. God tells Abraham to take 3 cows, 3 goats, 3 rams, a turtle dove, and a pigeon. And he instructs them, sounds very strange, to cut the 3 cows in half, the 3 goats in half, and the 3 rams in half, but not the turtle dove and the pigeon. We'll come back to that. And so he has the cows cut in half, the goats and the rams, and he walks through this, making this covenant with the Almighty. And what are these 3 animals representing? They're representing the 3 exiles. And in those 3 exiles, what this animal is being cut in half represent is that there's a clear, concise, 2 sides to the arguments they were presenting, with a common thread between all of them. You see, the way of the world is to take resources that you have and use it to dominate and take from those around you. The way of the Torah, the way that the Jewish people are supposed to influence the other nations, is that we use the resources provided to us to give to the world around us. One is in a state of selfishness, and the Torah way, the way the Jew is supposed to influence the world around us, is one of selflessness, of giving. The Almighty is in a constant state of giving. We line up with our source of everything by being in a state of giving as well. So in these exiles, we were able to provide a clear-cut argument to their argument. Any truth seeker would be able to find this. So for instance, the philosophy of the Babylonians was whoever is stronger should use their strength to make those around them submissive to them. The Jewish way, the Torah way, the way God instructs us, is to use our strength to make our body submissive to our soul. When there are things happening in our external environment, and one is at a level to where when those situations would cause an ordinary man to become angry, the Jew who is strong, the definition of our idea of strength according to Torah is that they are able to overcome those emotions and approach every situation with equanimity, with love, compassion, understanding that whatever the other person did, there's no reason to respond to it in anger. That is our idea of strength, a clear-cut division between these 2 philosophies. One is use your strength to overpower other people and make them submissive to you. And the other is use your strength to overpower your own emotions and bodily urges and desires and approach others and build those up around you to show compassion to other people. And the same is true of the Persian exile. God gave man the ability to experience pleasure, beauty, enjoyment, and lust. And the Persian philosophy was life is all about pursuing those things. And that the only meaning of life was maximizing those physical pleasures. The Torah viewpoint, the view that aligns us with our Creator, is that all those things can be used in an alternative way. They can be used to bring us closer to our Creator and align us with His will. Because the true pleasure is that connection to our infinite internal Creator. That is where the true pleasure comes from. And the third exile of Greece also has 2 arguments. They were intellectuals, according to today how most people define intellectuals. Let's explore this a little bit. This is the difference in wisdom between the secular world today and what Torah teaches us. The secular world, the Greek philosophy, which still lives on today, is that you acquire knowledge in order, again, to dominate other people, to control situations, to succeed in business. The more knowledge you acquire, the more egocentric you become, the more prideful you become. For the Jew who pursues the wisdom according to Torah, wisdom is defined as being aware that you know nothing. The more someone studies Torah wisdom, the more they know so little about the world around them. The study of Torah makes someone humble, not arrogant. It is just the opposite. And we'll come back to each of these a little more because they're all tied in to the fourth exile, which is Edom, which again comes from Esau. I'm telling you, this opened my eyes to something like I was so confused about for so long. Something that brought me great frustration. And this whole idea brings so much clarity to it. The reason Abraham was not instructed to cut the turtle dove and the pigeon in half, because those birds represent our current exile. And in the verse, it discusses that then Abraham fell asleep and had this prophecy. And it was terrifying for him to learn about the exiles. But the exile that made him very distraught was his fourth one. And here's why. Abraham, the way he influenced the world around him was when he met people one-on-one, he did acts of loving kindness and got people just to thank God. But he would influence people by not rebuking them, but by debating someone who wanted to debate him. And like we discussed, he was able to debate these various arguments that these future nations would impose on us in these exiles. But the exile of Edom was different. The reason is that Edom does not represent any ideology, which makes it as a foe and an exile so much more dangerous and challenging, and why we've been stuck here for so long. The dove representing Edom, the Hebrew word is gozel. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And that word gozel also means thief. Edom has no philosophy of its own. What it does is it steals from the philosophy of Babylon, Persia, and Greece. Edom could put on different masks at different times, in different situations, and constantly change roles. That is why the exile of Edom is not tied to one nation. It started with the exile of Rome, and then it became Christianity, and then the Western civilization, which are really one branch at different levels of growth. And what is the most challenging part of this exile of Edom that we find ourselves in today is that you can win an argument, a debate. They will concede, but yet they will continue on in their ways and not change. I'm going to give you several examples of this. Let's look at, again, with Esau. Esau, the whole idea was he had low self-esteem. He did not believe that he could change who he was. He could learn the ways of Torah and the ways of God and how to elevate himself like his father Isaac and Abraham, but he did not believe he could do so. So he relinquished himself just continuing to commit the same sins: theft, murder, rape. I've heard this from someone, I was blown away, that Christians believe when they study Genesis, that the story of Adam and Eve, what that is there to teach us, is that mankind are a bunch of worthless, horrible sinners. If you spend any time talking to a Christian, you will find out that that's exactly what they think. They think that God gave the Torah to the Jewish people to show the world we couldn't live up to it, to show the world that we are not able of achieving anything, of transforming who we are as individuals. And so according to Christian philosophy, the pinnacle of mankind was to simply say, I accept J.C. Penney as my Lord and Savior. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful by saying J.C. Penney, but there is a verse in the Torah to not say the name of an idol. And there's also a verse in the Torah where God says to mock the name of an idol. So I'm just fulfilling the Torah by calling him J.C. Penney. But that's the whole philosophy of Christianity. You can't change yourself. Just articulate those words. J.C. Penney is my Lord and Savior, and you've accomplished everything a human being can accomplish. Again, coming from a place of Esau, of very low self-esteem. But I'm going to give you some examples of how, through this exile, and you'll see how we are totally trapped in this exile too. And this is an exile of the mind. And these are examples of how, through debate, how the Christian establishment, the church, would concede, but yet continue on, even though they conceded that their argument is wrong, that their philosophy is wrong. As we all know, the church, through the Greeks, took our Torah, made several sages translate it for them, including the Tanakh, the prophets, and the writings, our entire Bible. And they call it the Old Testament. There's a prophecy by Isaiah that Christians read every Christmas Eve. And it is a horrible mistranslation. In their translation, it discusses a fallen angel named Lucifer that goes to war with God, which is, again, against the whole idea that there is only one power, God. But it's this dual fight. And obviously, you can tell it all comes from Greek mythology. All Greek mythology is built on a god having intercourse with a human woman and creating some half man, half god, like Hercules. This is the whole idea behind J.C. Penney. It's just a continuation of this Greek philosophy. Again, Rome, Edom, Christianity, Western civilization, all stealing from the same ideas. And they would read this Isaiah, mistranslated Isaiah, on Christmas Eve, and then the sermon would end with how the Jews killed Jesus. And that is why from December 25th to January 1st, the Christians would go out, which had just recently joined forces with the Roman Empire, and they would kill Jews and rape Jews. This is where Christmas caroling originated, was they gave the population a period of time between December 25th and January 1st, where whatever they did to Jews, raping, killing, stealing, destroying their businesses, there was no penalties for it. And that is why many Jews today have a custom of keeping their lights off on Christmas Eve, to remember all those horrible moments in time. But here's what I wanted to get to. In the 1960s, as our relationship with the Christians improved, thank God, things were a lot safer. We weren't seeing Christians leaving the church on Christmas Eve drunk and naked and running through our towns, trying to rape our daughters, wives and mothers, and kill us. Someone brought to the church's attention, your translation of Isaiah is wrong. It's not about a fallen angel named Lucifer. It's about the king of Assyria coming down. And the woman who was pregnant was Isaiah's wife, and it wasn't a virgin birth. And the church, back in the mid-1960s, after getting this letter, but they conceded. They said, you're right. It's a totally wrong translation. There is no reference in here to a fallen angel named Lucifer that's fighting God throughout history. There's no virgin birth mentioned. This Isaiah passage is the foundation of their belief system in this whole idea of Christianity. So they conceded. It was a bad translation, our bad. But what has happened since? They still read that mistranslation every Christmas Eve. Again, it's exactly what this verse was talking about in the commentary and prophecy on it, that they'll concede an argument, but they'll continue on with their way, which is what makes them so formidable as a foe and as an exile. There's no way to argue against someone they'll concede the argument, but continue on doing whatever they were doing. I've seen Rabbi Tovia Singer. If you're not familiar with him, he basically dedicated himself to protecting Jews from Christian missionaries. So he learned all the New Testament, and so he knows it better than the Christians. And that way he can educate Jews on all these mistranslations throughout the Torah, the prophets, everything, where they mistranslate words in order to make it sort of hint to this virgin birth in Jesus. And I've seen debates with Christian ministers, preachers, and it's in every one of them. I haven't seen one posted in a long time. I suspect like no one's going to debate him. But I literally watched one where the Christian preacher at the end conceded, you're right. Said the New Testament doesn't make any sense. It's wrong. It conflicts with the Torah. We say the Torah is true. It conflicts with the Torah idea of Messiah. He totally conceded. But then he said, but in my heart of hearts, I'm still a Christian. I'll continue to be a Christian. Boom. You can't win. I have a friend of mine, Rod Bryant. He was a Christian minister at a very large church in a suburb of Houston. Thousands and thousands of families. I've had him on my podcast in the first season. And he was a truth seeker, and he got tired whenever he had a question about the quote-unquote Old Testament, that the church leaders said, don't ask questions. So he said, well, no, I am going to ask questions. So he ended up finding a rabbi in Israel, learning. He learned through actually understanding what the text of the Torah said, that Christianity was a sham. And he ended up deciding, instead of converting to Judaism, to remain a B'nai Noach, which this is, the other nations are supposed to follow the 7 Noahide laws. The purpose of the Jew is not to convert the non-Jew to be a Jew. The purpose of the Jew, in the end, is to teach non-Jews how to follow the 7 Noahide laws, not the 613 mitzvos that we were given. We're supposed to be teaching them just Amunah and the general principles of living in a civilized society. And he told me, he's like, I can dismantle the entire Christian religion when I'm talking to someone in 10 minutes. But he would tell me, Rod Bryant would tell me, like, I'll dismantle it with someone in 10 minutes. And they always say, oh, you're right. I know, you're right. That's false. All these things you're saying are true, but I'm still a Christian. This is the whole idea. Now, let's get back to why this matters for us as the Jewish people. And let's see how we've been influenced by this exile. That, again, it bounces around and takes from the other 3 philosophies. For those of you who went to college, or what they call it outside of the U.S., going to university, think about this. The difference between what they teach on acquiring wisdom. We teach that you acquire wisdom in order to learn how to change who you are, to refine yourself, to overcome your lust. So we have the bris milah, circumcision. It's not to perform a surgical procedure. It's to remind us the covenant of sexual purity, that we don't give in to our lust like an animal. The rest of the world, they want to pursue lust. So we learn Torah wisdom to change who we are. But is that what happens when we went to college? Did we take classes and learn? Did it transform who we were? I went to college. Answer is no. You went to class, you learned a subject, and then what did you do on the weekend and the evenings? You went out and you satisfied your lust. You went to parties, you got wasted, you were either having sex or you were trying to have sex. Is that the Jewish way? Is that the Torah way? Or is that the Rome way, what they took from Greece? Many of us, which I did not, but many I know, joined fraternities, even Jewish fraternities, Greek fraternities. I know at these Jewish fraternities, people tell me, no, we weren't sitting in our fraternity house studying Torah and praying to our Creator and pursuing spiritual endeavors. No, we were doing exactly what the non-Jewish fraternities were doing. It had nothing to do about personal refinement. It was learning information to dominate others, to succeed in business, whatever profession, and outside of that coursework, to go out and satisfy our lust. So you can see, my friends, we've been influenced. This is the mindset of the exile of Edom. This exile, my friend, again, it exists in the mind. Let me ask you a question. Many of you listening are Torah observant, but many of you are not. This may be the first podcast you've heard from me that someone forwarded to you. And I want to present an idea. When I go into many of these reform and conservative synagogues, there's a tremendous amount of wealth there. Let me ask you a question. Do all these successful Jews at those synagogues, do you think that the way they acquired their wealth was by asking questions, using their reason, thinking things through to conclusion in order to know how to succeed in their endeavors? And the answer is, of course. They researched, discerned fact from falsehood, used logic to determine what their course of action was. They know how to do this, obviously, but do they apply it to the most important aspect of their life? There's a very large conservative synagogue here, and someone told me that Someone was researching, where did the Torah come from? And this synagogue has 4 rabbis. And the person asked each rabbi, where did the Torah come from? And sadly, they all had 4 different answers. And worse, they all got it wrong. None of them knew that the Torah came from the Almighty, every letter, every word. Like, it's so repetitive in the written Torah and these people are rabbis. And you think, like, how many Jews go about showing up at Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and don't think about anything? They have a Passover Seder, not asking, did these things really take place? If they didn't take place, the 10 plagues and the exodus from Egypt and the splitting of the sea, then why am I here? Why am I doing this? That's a good question to ask, but they don't, right? Many just continue to go through the motions, never asking important questions. Why did God create the world? What is in that Torah scroll they dance around with on Rosh Hashanah that I've never really studied past being 10 years old when my Jewish education was coloring in pictures of Joseph's coat of many colors and Moses holding the 10 Commandments? I mean, that's the end of the Jewish education. Then you have a bar mitzvah party, and then your education is over with your academic portfolio of a bunch of pictures you colored in. Never asking questions. What is in the Torah? Is it true? How do I know it's true? This, my friends, this robotic way of going through life, and the most important element of our existence, is a mindset in exile of Edom, of Esau, of Rome, of Christianity. Even though we're showing up at synagogue, we're trapped in the same mindset. Don't question things, just go with the motions. And the same is happening in the Torah observant community. People grow up as children, following the laws of Shabbos and kosher, but they never really truly learn why we know our Torah is true, why God gave us evidence in our generation that it came directly from Him. And as the Torah says, that all the mitzvos and the laws are there for us in every generation. And they serve a grand purpose towards the overall creation. They're not really taught that. They're just going through the motions. And do they stay religious? Do they stay a Torah observant Jew? No, many don't. It's happening all the time now. It's a mindset of Edom. It's a mindset of Edom. Don't ask questions. Don't think things through thoroughly. Another aspect of Edom that they stole from Greece is entertainment, the Colosseum. All those things have gravitated to where we now are in a world of total entertainment. So people don't have to ask these questions. They can just zone out when they get off from work. Binge watch a series on Netflix. Not stop and ask such fundamental questions that without the distractions, every Jew would be asking. So where does Ishmael fit into all this? The descendants of Ishmael, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran. Because we're not in the exile of Ishmael, we're in the exile from Esau, Edom, Rome, Christianity, Western civilization, to not think about anything outside of making a living and entertainment. Ishmael, my friends, is there as simply a stick that Hashem can use to smack us when we need to be smacked, to wake us up out of the mental exile of Edom. That's how he uses Ishmael. And so if we want to win this war, while it must be fought by the IDF and on the ground fighting these terrorist organizations, my friends, our role is to free our mind of this exile and help other Jews escape it as well. Once we do that, then Hashem will not need the stick of Ishmael, and he will remove him himself. Otherwise, as long as he needs that stick, as long as God needs that stick to keep slapping us around until we wake up out of our fog and simply start asking questions, it will drag on and on and on because it serves a purpose in God's divine plan for his world and the role the Jews took on, the responsibility we took on at Mount Sinai. It's funny, as I mentioned, when my friend Rod Bryant asked his church leaders questions about quote unquote the Old Testament, which whenever I hear a Jew say Old Testament, you need to get slapped too. We do not call our Torah the Old Testament, but they say we don't ask questions. I've heard this a lot. of a friend of mine, a very dear friend, is a rabbi, told me that he went and spoke at an event with other religious leaders from other religions. And he went and had coffee with the Christian pastor or preacher. So he was a very nice man. And my friend said, hey, can I go first? Because I have a class I have to teach at a certain time. I need to get to that. And the Christian preacher said, sure. And he said, so what are you teaching? And my rabbi friend said, well, I'm just doing a Q&A. And the Christian preacher said, what? It's like, yeah, I tell everyone to come with their questions and I answer their questions. And this Christian preacher literally said, I could never do that. If we allowed Christians to start asking questions, the whole system would fall apart. What? That shows the falsehood of it all. This is the mindset of Edom. We knew that. We know that. But we're trapped in it ourselves. For those of you who are new to this podcast, I'm not being judgmental if you happen to be a non-religious Jew. I spent the first 40 years of my life as an atheist. And I'll tell you what got me to do the first thing, to break my mind from Edom, is I just started asking questions. What propelled me to start asking questions was I was holding my daughter. She was an infant. She was so sweet and pure. And I knew what I pursued throughout most of my life. I didn't want that for her. I wanted her to have more meaning from this world, other than just pursuing pleasures in your 20s, get an education, make a good living, make some money so you can retire and live off your estate until you die, and not think about what happens after you die. Just avoid yourself. Just entertain yourself. Play golf. Watch sports. Watch politics. Just keep your mind distracted. I wanted more from this world, and that's why I started asking questions again. And I started exploring whether or not there's a God. I'm not going to be repetitive for my longtime listeners, but there's something I did want to clarify for my longer-term listeners. The second thing I did after I was able to prove that there is a God is I looked for logical proofs of Torah, and I found them. The reason I pursued determining if Torah was true was not because I was Jewish. I wasn't approaching this exercise biasly. I'm Jewish, so I should look into the Torah. No. I knew that Christianity and the Muslim faith were predicated on the Torah being true. So for the efficiency of the exercise of seeing if anyone throughout human history knew the truth of what this infinite eternal creator wanted from us, I figured I would start with Torah, because if I could finally definitively show that there's no truth to Torah, then it would immediately knock down Christianity and Islam. It would just knock them all down, and then I could pursue the Eastern religions. That was my thought process. That's why I started with Torah. But I'll save you some time, my friends. If you are new on this journey, the Torah does have the answers. My only request of you, my friend, and it's not a big one, is to simply start asking the questions. Is there a God? Why did he create this world? Why did he create the Jew? What is the purpose of everything? If you just simply start asking the questions, it will create the yearning desire to know the answers. And my friends, take it from me, all those answers are in your Torah. Now, for those of you in my audience who are religious Jews, you may say, Dan, this was some interesting things I didn't really think about, but it's good to know where we're in, and to know that if we want to end the war with Ishmael, then we need to free every Jew we can from the mental exile of Edom. And one of the ways you could do that, if I did a satisfactory job of explaining all this, I hope I did, that I did this podcast as something that you could forward to your Jewish brother or Jewish sister that is been going through the motions. Either they don't do anything with Judaism, or they show up at their synagogue a few times a year, have a Passover Seder, and light the Hanukkah candles, but not knowing the meaning behind anything. Anyone we know that whose mindset is locked in Edom, I'm hoping this podcast can be used as a tool to free them from that. I mean, think about it. God's using Ishmael as a stick to wake us up out of this mental exile. I'm just asking you to listen to a podcast and share it. So my friends, if we can do this together, we can end this war. We can free our minds and understand that this world has a lot more to offer. It's bigger, vast, and our role as a Jew is tantamount to the Creator completing His creation, and it all begins by simply asking questions. Thank you for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting Torch so they can continue to spread Torah wisdom to the world by making a donation at torchweb.org and clicking Donate in the top right corner of the page.